Aberdeen, Chapter 4, Matchbox. I sat there for a few more minutes watching Aberdeen as she slept right next to me on the couch. Either it was the drugs or it was just the exhaustion from the fun night we had had. The long, cold hand of sleep and exhaustion had grabbed me and pulled me down through the colorful tunnel of dreams and landed me in the middle of a flowery field. It was quiet and the wind was blowing and a breeze was pushing the flowers in one direction. A small tree sat in the distance, and as I walked over towards it, I could see Aberdeen sitting there with all sorts of crazy mismatched animals of different parts and different types. Beetles that barked, rabbits with elephant heads, dragons with chicken heads, and giraffes with little legs and a wiener dog body. It was something to behold. I would look up in the sky, would be painted this beautiful mismatch of acid trip-like colors, like in a lava lamp or the background of the That 70s show. It was crazy because it had all the fun and the whimsy of an old 70s cartoon, and the Beatles' disregard for color control. All of a sudden, everything went black, and I realized that all that glitters is not gold. There was something wrong. We were all in a box. We were pounding against it, and other people were moaning and groaning and asking the same question: why are we here? Where are we? We could feel the small tomb that we were in open. Aberdeen was next to me as I could see through the glimmering light that shone through. I held her hand tight, and a big, large, ethereal, ghost-like hand had grabbed one of the people and dumped the rest of us onto the ground. We laid motionless because we were unable to move at all, paralyzed in fear or paralyzed in my drug-induced state. We watched as the man was struck against the box, and then all of a sudden a bright glow of light, red and yellow and brilliant aflame, had shown up. He burned bright as he yelled and screamed, and then the hand shaked violently, and the bright glowing head went into a dark, shriveled, smoldering, smoke-billowing stick, and it was dropped. The human form that was struck against the box had been turned into a burnt stick, like a match. The hand disappeared, and I quickly awoke from my sleep. My head rose quickly, and of course anybody who has lifted their head fast after getting out of a really bad dream knows that a headache will ensue immediately. My head immediately slapped my forehead as I braced it. It felt like someone was marching to 1,000 beats of a drum and bearing their heels into my brain. I winced as the light in the room from the light bulbs had beamed into my eyes like a laser beam. I got up and put both feet on the floor. As I was closing my eyes, I was feeling around to see if Aberdeen was around, and she wasn't. I started to freak out and panic because I was late for work. I looked at my watch sitting next to my phone, and it read that it was too late for me to get to work. As a matter of fact, it said it was 10:30 at night. I began to freak out, and I ran to the bathroom, started to get ready, and then halfway through my cold shower, trying to ease my pain of my headache and whatever else that was in my system, I realized it was the weekend. The cold water was nice, and it relieved the pain that was in my head. My head sunk down, and I braced myself on the shower wall, and I let the water fall off of me. I looked down and breathed a sigh of relief. I kissed my finger and pointed it to the ceiling, saying, "Thank God for the weekends." And I took another sigh of relief. After my shower, I dried off, went back downstairs, and began watching the TV. One of my friends had gotten up a couple hours before he had to go to work, and we began talking. He was poking fun at me because he knew that my knees turned to foam whenever I was around Abby, and before I could ask, he began asking me if I had fallen for her. I was going to lie to him by saying that not really, I didn't really like her like that, but he could see right through my lie immediately. I ended up breaking down and saying yes. He said, "I thought so," and I said, "What about you guys? She says you're pretty cool," but he shook his head, being one of those California guys, and he said, "No, man, I wouldn't steal your Betty like that. And besides, who needs them right now anyway? I mean, we live with a bunch of guys. It's not like bringing any other girl would be a good thing for us. I mean, we're slobs. I laughed and chuckled and nodded in approval of that because it was pretty much true. We talked for a little more, and I asked him where Aberdeen was, and he said he saw her get up a couple hours ago and wander out the front door. He said she was probably going to go get groceries, but I kind of looked at him in disbelief because it was late at night. Who goes and gets groceries at, what was now 11 o'clock? He said she left around 9 o'clock and said she'd be back in a bit. He didn't think too much of it. I was kind of worried because I don't know. I can't really say. Being around her, I was confused. The crazy things that she was wanting to do and the revenge that I was helping her get never really struck as bad because I hated my crappy job and I hated the company I worked for. I saw them screw other people over. She was honestly a dime a dozen. The only difference was she had long legs, a pretty figure, and she wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. She was a face. I don't know how many times I've had to write lawsuits from workers or ex-scientists that work in the lab a couple years ago. I just can't say. I mean, I don't know if she was taking documents to prove that she was innocent or to prove that it was her idea. That much I'm not sure. I really hope she wasn't doing anything drastic. But in the back of my mind, I guess that dream was trying to tell me that maybe what I was doing wasn't so bad. But I shook my head. She wouldn't do that. I mean, yeah, she's wild. She's a little crazy, but no one would take it too far. Of course, then again, I wasn't sure what too far was. I mean, for a long time, I had been trying really, really hard to realize what I was going to be. Be it God or whatever it was in my life that is controlling it, or just my inept attitude for everything, my cynicism for other people's happy lives. It took something of a long, long time. But every time I was around her, my knees would turn to foam. I felt like everything would be okay. I could feel a hand on my shoulder, like my dad whenever I'd fall over on my bicycle, assure me that things were okay. You were doing a good thing. And I would be rewarded by having fun and going out and doing crazy things. Sure, they wouldn't be exactly things that were in my comfort zone, but when she showed up in my life was too comfortable. It was too mundane. It was too boring. This girl could hold a match up to my hand and burn me, and I wouldn't care. Call me a jackass, or call me an idiot, or call me just some kind of wet puppy. But it was the best thing that happened to me. I hadn't been around any women. I didn't have the confidence after my last girlfriend left me. I didn't have anything, and here she is giving me everything I could possibly want. She was like a drug. She was like a white, glistening goddess dancing before me, and all I could do was sit on my knees in mesmerization as my eyes were wide open and my jaw agape in great awe. Only this one was clad in leather, reeked of Axe body spray, cheap booze, and was clad in pink hair and a gritty attitude. The exact opposite of me, and I think that's what the old saying meant by opposites attract. And here I am, just some guy in a business suit, working at a crappy dead-end job with zero aspirations. That dream, Abby, between the two, I wasn't sure if my life was an omen. The smoke was telling me that your eyes were clouded, and it was telling me to stay where I am, to push away the problems, because that flickering flame was only going to be so fun. The fun, happy, joyous, crazy, whimsical, color-induced drug dream that I had was all a lie, but I wasn't sure. I couldn't think that. Hot about Abby. I didn't want to believe it. Abby showed up a couple hours later at the front door, and she was happy, and she dropped some groceries from the local quick shop down the road. She told me to come outside and toss the helmet at me as normal. I caught it and put it on my head. As I sat on the back of the motorcycle, she sat down and turned around and put a handkerchief around my eyes, and said it was going to be a surprise. I was pretty excited, but at the same time, not seeing where we were going and the fact that she was a crazy driver kind of made it bad both ways. We drove for a couple minutes, and I could feel the nice cool breeze. The mystery of what we were going to do. I didn't know. Were we going to go all the way? Was I going to get action? I mean, I don't know. I mean, call me a perv, but I wasn't sure. Was it going to be a romantic picnic? And then I shook my head and laughed a little bit to myself. That's not Abby's style. I didn't hear any music. I didn't hear anything else. It was just quiet. I could hear the cicadas in the background, and there was some rain on the ground, so the tires that would pass us would make that nice slickery noise. We finally pulled over, and she helped me off the bike as I felt groping around to make sure that I didn't bump into anything to make myself look like an idiot in front of the girl of my dreams. She gave me a small box and told me to hold on. Don't do anything with it. She wrapped my hands around it, held it with one hand, and she told me, "What is your greatest wish?" I couldn't utter anything. She said, "Squeeze the box. It'll be a surprise." I figured it was some sort of confetti or something like that. I pulled it, and what happened? I can't say. I was excited. I was hoping something cool would happen. I heard a large beep come from the box in my hand. I slowly took my hand out of hers and lifted up the blindfold with one eye peering out. It had a small antenna and a green and red light blinking, and all of a sudden I looked up and it was the building that I had worked at. Everything goes really slow in that situation as I looked over at her in disbelief. Her with that maniacal smile, teeth grinning, eyes wide open. As I looked back, her hair got blown, and a big red blast came across. The building rumbled, and fire had licked far out. Glass was being shown everywhere, and as I looked at her, her eyes were wide open as she laughed. Glass would fly by, and one grazed her by the side of the cheek and kept flying. My eyes winced as I fell over. I was frightened. I dropped the box onto the ground. At this point, she was staring at the fire in awe, as if some sort of pyromaniac. I didn't know what to think. I was shocked. The building continued to rumble and explode. I stood up, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could say anything, she looked at me and said, "I love you," and grabbed me by the head and kissed me harder than anybody had ever done. I melted a little bit. The fire and the explosions began to continue. The building rumbled. The glass flew more. Rocks were crumbling and debris was flying everywhere next to us. I pushed her off of me, and then I realized that I was just being played this entire time. Those dreams, those omens, the signs were all there. This wasn't getting back at somebody. This wasn't trying to save people. This was disgusting Class A revenge. The long time for me trying hard, and it taking a long time for me to find something, it was a test of my patience. This vixen had me foaming at the knees, bowing to her every whim, drinking the Kool-Aid like all those cultists with Jim Jones. I didn't know what I was doing. I never saw her dark side in her eyes. All I could see was hope, craziness, a new life. I didn't see this. All along, I was the match that was being burned. I was just a tool to be used for momentary pleasure. I saw the flames lick out even more, as more of the wings and parts of the building caught on fire and exploded. I had the taste of sin on my lips from that deep kiss. She put her finger slowly against her face and pulled the blood off of her face from the cut. She held it up above her head and looked at it as it slowly ran down the length of her hand. As it painted the sky. More explosions happened, and I ducked down and put my hands over my head, and I told her we had to leave. As I grabbed one of her hands, she still kept looking at that damn blood, like it was a big deal. I told her, "What are we going to do?" And I began to hear sirens far off. She told me to relax, that they were 15 minutes off, as she still began to stare at that hand. I grabbed her other hand and pulled it down. Her head jerked down and she gritted her teeth looking at me. And she grinned, that evil maniacal grin. And I began to see that dark abyss that was truly in her eyes. The smoke had cleared. The flame had burned out. The sweet taste of sin had burned away. And I saw the devil in her eyes. It took me this long to realize it. She smiled and grinned, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to run away because I didn't want to leave my investment here. But I didn't want to stay here either because I knew that if we did, we'd go to prison. She bent down and grabbed the remote control box and picked it up and put it into her pocket. She hopped back onto the bike and motioned me to come towards her. Not knowing really what to do, I put the helmet on and sat on the bike and we rode off. We drove for what felt like hours. We eventually pulled over at a gas station far outside of my city. I sat on the curb, smelling of smoke and shirt all messed up. My hands buried in my knees and my knees haunched up. I braced my elbows and I buried my face in my hands, and I didn't know if I was to cry because of the stupid thing that I did. My parents always told me to stay away from bad people, and here I am dancing with the devil. I wanted to get back at him with a prank, maybe some stinking fish, maybe some sort of panty bra prank like we did in my high school year. Maybe some graffiti, but not this. I figured like some sort of activist thing or some sort of documentary that I'd saw on TV on how people would expose bad companies, but not arson. And then I realized as I looked at my hands that I'd pulled that trigger. I hope to God people weren't in there. I was the matchstick that burnt all of her problems. I let her alluring attitude and her new hip style consume my mind. The truth began to surface more and more as I thought about it. She comes out nonchalant holding 2 Cokes, tosses one to me, and I let it roll out of my hands onto the ground, and it shattered. "The hell," she said. "That's a waste." And she popped hers open and began to drink it, as if nothing just happened. She finished her drink, wiped her hand against her mouth, and let out a deep belched loudly, and nonchalantly picked up my helmet and put it back in my lap, telling me, "Let's go. We still got a lot of traveling to do." She grabbed my hand, and as she was starting to walk away, her arm jerked, and she stopped. She paused for a minute, turned around, and asked me, "Why aren't I coming? Let's go." I just sat there for a minute, not saying a thing. She nudged me with her foot and asked me, "What's wrong? We need to leave. Come on, let's go. We're going on vacation. Let's go. Snap, snap." I didn't say anything. I just briefly looked over at her. I kept my head down. She looked at me and gritted her teeth, and angrily, as she was starting to get agitated, she said, "Don't do this. I can't go do this without you." I uttered that one phrase. "You used me. Like a matchstick." She laughed and said, "Yep, I sure did. But you're going to get the girl," she tried to reassure me in an arrogant tone. I said, "No, I'm not." Happy, smug look on her face immediately turned into a glare as she said, "You can't do this without me. You pulled the trigger. You are part of this. You let me do this. You let me into your job, and you let me do all the things that I needed to do to get back at them. You're an accomplice." She began to laugh. With that maniacal grin, she said, "It'll be just like in the movies. The two accomplices ride off into the sunset, living a lie, and that lie becomes the truth, and no one ever finds out about them. I planted the bombs around the gas lines. I made sure nobody was there, and I made it look like an accident. If anything, the insurance will pay for everything. You'll have your job, and I'll have my revenge. Victory like this isn't bittersweet, you see?" I noticed that she got on her knees and was looking at me, holding my hand. I was disgusted. I quickly jerked my hand out of hers and pushed her away. She fell back, and I could see her teeth gritting and tears welling up into her eyes. She said, "Don't do this. You can't leave me behind. Don't do this to me. You're not going to do this to me, not after what we just did. We need to stick together." And I just looked at her and laughed, and I said, "Get out of here." She stood up, punched me in the face, and I fell over, holding my jaw. As I got back up, she was already on her bike and already starting to speed off. I looked up, and the sun was starting to come up. It was nice. I sat there and stared at it for a few minutes. Then reality came back to me. I had a lot of walking to do. I hope to God that I don't get caught. But if I do, they might as well catch me in my mundane, everyday lifestyle. They might as well catch me with my pants down on the john, or working at my crappy dead-end job, or going out to get the paper, or waking up in that stupid bed in my stupid, pointless life. I let my boyish emotions get to me, and now here I am. I started walking, shuffling my way. I was in house slippers, so I walked a few miles, and trying to shuffle my feet and not pick them up too much so they don't fall off, they started to get raw. Occasionally I'd lift up my thumb and hope for the best, and eventually a truck had stopped, picked me up, and had took me home. I got out of the truck, I thanked the man, and he waved me off. I was looking down at the pavement, ashamed. I felt like a moron. I walked into the house, and one of my buddies was there, and he was up, and it was his day off. He was enthusiastic to see me. He was like, "Hey, how'd it go? Where's Abby?" I looked up at him. My head dropped back to the floor, and I stooped my way up to the stairs. I took off my sweaty clothes and was in the buff, and I just lied in my bed. My eyes began to well up because I made a huge mistake, and if I get caught, my life is ruined. I'm just another matchstick, ready to burn away.